Oh, yes, memes would be appreciated.
Welcome to Tech Tales. I'm Corbin Davenport,
I'm Lucas Bastos.
and today we are talking about the Apple IIGS, which was a Apple computer released in the 1980s. It was a 16-bit computer. Do you know anything about this?
Honestly, I am not too well versed in the Apple IIGS, so it's going to be very interesting to learn about it with you.
Okay. Do you know anything about the Apple II?
Oh man, so I mean, I've heard stuff here and there about it. I don't know too much about the history. I know so the Apple II was kind of like the first big computer for Apple. Is that
Yeah.
correct, or is this was it okay?
Yeah, it was their first like mass-produced computer because before then it was just the Apple One, which was like a board they sold, and then you'd have to
Yeah.
like put it together and like make your own case and stuff. Um,
Oh, okay, yeah.
yeah, which is why when the Apple Ones show up at auctions for way too much money, some of them have cool wooden cases and stuff because like
Mm.
you'd have to build your own, like they didn't do that
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah, I think I saw a recent one. I don't remember how long ago that went up for auction. It was like, yeah, it was made out of wood, and I don't know how much it went for. I think it went for a good amount of money, right?
Yeah, they're a lot of money because they were all hand assembled by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. But yeah, so the Apple II computer was released in June of 1977 as an 8-bit personal computer, and it was Apple's second product after the hand built Apple One. It had a MOS Technology 6502 CPU running at 1.023 megahertz. It had 4 kilobytes of RAM, upgradable to 48, support for color graphics, and for storage, you could use either cassette tapes or a 5.25 inch floppy drive. The first model was priced at $1,298, which adjusted for inflation in 2023 is $6,500.
Yeah, sounds like a beast of a computer there.
Yeah, it's really funny looking back at the pricing for this stuff because like this was one of the first computers that you could just like buy and plug in and it would be a computer. Like you didn't assemble
Mhm.
anything. You still had to have like a monitor and like some storage drive if you wanted to save your stuff, but even that wasn't strictly necessary. And a lot of people
Yeah.
bought these and just plugged it into their TVs. So I have a picture of an Apple II.
Okay, yeah, I think I've seen this ad before, but yeah, definitely a lot different than the computers we see today.
The Apple II ended up being one of the first successful series of mass produced personal computers. And Apple later introduced other models that had more compact designs or more memory built in or more video options. The most popular model, the Apple IIe, was sold for nearly 11 years with only minor changes. However, most of them retain the same basic 6502 chip running at 1 megahertz with the same exact graphics. So over time, that kind of became a little bit less impressive. Really, where this computer took off was schools. Like, this is the reason Apple was dominant in schools in the 80s and for some of the 90s, is just because schools bought a ton of these things. The Apple III in 1980 and the Apple Lisa in 1983 were both market failures. We did an episode about the Apple Lisa. So the Apple II series just kept going. And in 1984, Apple introduced the first Macintosh computer. The first Mac was pretty limited and also it was extremely expensive, like far more than the Apple II. So there was still a reason for the Apple II series to exist. Around 1983 and 1984, Steve Wozniak and other engineers at Apple were working on a new 16-bit model called the Apple IIX. And this one was designed around the new 65816 processor from Western Design Center, which was a 16-bit processor. So the original Apple II was 8-bit. And what was really cool about this chip is that it had an 8-bit emulation mode. So in theory, Apple could make a computer with this chip that could run new software but could still have backwards compatibility with the Apple II.
And that's Hardware or software emulation?
It's hardware. Yeah, so it can
Hardware
like
emulation.
yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. And like that was especially cool for the day because like it is hard to wrap your head around this now, but back then most computers were not intercompatible. Like
Yeah.
you had different software in all of them, different disk formats, like even upgrades in the same computer line might not be compatible with each other. So that would have been very cool. However, early production samples provided by WDC were constantly failing. The chip didn't work. Uh, so Wozniak's team considered using maybe a Motorola 6800 or an Intel 8088, which was the first like x86 chip, on a separate board as a coprocessor, while keeping the Apple II 6502 chip, which would still let it run Apple II software, but then give it a huge performance bump. But then you have to have two chips and a more complex design, so that's going to be more expensive. Um,
Right.
and then eventually this was sort of canceled in around like March 1984. It just didn't turn out to be practical. But eventually Apple's management decided to try again at the idea of a 16-bit Apple II because this was around the time when the Apple IIc was released, which kind of renewed interest in this product line. The Apple IIc was the C meant compact, I think, but it was like a smaller one. It wasn't as upgradable, but it was smaller and it was very cheap. So
Mm.
there's a lot more interest in this product line now.
It's kind of cool that I guess they haven't done it recently. The last one was the iPhone, what, 5C, right? They kind of brought the C back for a
Yeah,
little smaller, cheaper one. It's kind of cool that they kind of had a little throwback to that.
and that C was for color also, which I think they need to
Right.
bring back. Those were some fun colors on that one.
Yeah, and those were pretty popular too. I remember when that phone came out, it was like I feel like a lot of people kind of went with those options. It was, cheaper, had nice colors. Is what it was made plastic instead of aluminum, but it's like
Yeah.
I don't think most people really cared.
No, I mean, I'd prefer it if I had the option because, like, if I drop plastic on the floor, it's not going to shatter. Although the Apple IIc might actually dent your floor if you dropped it.
Yeah, for sure.
So the Apple IIX project was revived under the codename Phoenix, with a focus on developing a true Apple II upgrade and not a completely new design. Steve Wozniak helped design the computer, and the team decided not to use a coprocessor like the older project for all of those reasons. But before the new computer was completed, Steve Wozniak actually left Apple. So there was a growing division at this time between the Apple II team, where Steve Wozniak was working, and the Macintosh team, which was led by Steve Jobs. The Apple II division was notably not invited to the Macintosh launch event, with the exception of Woz himself. So all of them were like sitting at Apple watching the Mac event on
Wow.
TV. Yeah, that's not very nice. Also, the Apple II series was at least somewhat often not brought up in like investor meetings and stuff like that, which was really weird because it was the bulk of Apple's revenue at this time.
Yeah.
Like it'd be like if Apple did like a press event today and just did not mention the iPhone a single time. Like that's kind of the scale
Yeah.
we're talking about here.
I wonder if it was kind of because they're dragging the product line along, or it was just seen as like a cheaper option. Yeah, I wonder what the reason for that was.
It was, I think it was mostly like internal politics, like just this rivalry going on, and management was kind of preferring the Macintosh. Like that was seen as the way forward, sort of,
Yeah.
which, eventually would be. But like in this moment in time, the Apple II was a huge success. People were still buying them. And the Macintosh was not as capable and it was much more expensive. So that just like, that wasn't going to happen right now. By early 1985, Steve Wozniak had quit Apple and said it had been, quote, going in the wrong direction for the last 5 years, quote. And he also sold most of his stock in the company at that point. Several other people in the Apple II division left around the same time, including marketing manager Dave Larson, Apple IIc developer Joe Enos, engineering manager Peter Quinn, and former Apple IIX project leader Ida Cole, which that makes sense to me. Like if they're being treated that way, yeah, I'd probably go work somewhere else if I could.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, especially, I mean, in Apple at this point, they're probably a big company, but they weren't as, I don't think they were as prestigious as they are today, right? So, leaving probably wasn't as big of a decision for them as much as probably would have been today. They're probably just like, oh, they're not
Yeah.
paying attention to us. We're out of here.
Yeah, they weren't the
Meanwhile, today
richest
it's like,
company on earth
yeah,
yet. Yeah.
yeah,
So work continued on an upgraded Apple II, and rumors about it were ramping up as software developers were given early access. And the computer was finally revealed in September 1986 as the Apple IIGS, with the G standing for graphics and the S standing for sound. I have a part of a New York Times article from the time by Andrew Pollock. They said, the new Apple IIGS to be produced in Singapore should help the sales of the Apple II line, which is aimed primarily at elementary and secondary schools and at the home market. The computers have faced challenges from the International Business Machines Corporation and the Tandy Corporation in the education market. In the home market, the Apple line has been hurt by low-priced clones of the IBM personal computer and by the Commodore Amiga and Atari ST, machines that have superior sound and graphics. The Apple IIGS, the GS stands for Graphics and Sound, should put Apple back on a competitive footing. Software developers who have seen the machine say its color display is dazzling, though it is perhaps not as good at animation as the Amiga. The machine has a 16-bit microprocessor. The other Apple II computers can process only 8 bits of information at a time. The Apple IIGS's biggest selling point, however, is that it will be able to run more than 90% of the software that is already available for the Apple IIe and IIc machines, and in many cases run such programs 3 times as fast. But to take full advantage of the IIGS, new software would have to be written. Many leading software companies have already developed products for the machine, and Apple said 40 titles would be ready by Christmas. This new software will not run on the older Apple II machines. While sales of the Apple IIGS are expected to be good, they are likely to be inhibited at first by the machine's price. The base unit without a disk driver monitor will retail for $1,000. A full system will sell for $1,900, compared to about $1,000 for a similar Atari ST. Moreover, the primary and secondary school market is one in which buying decisions are made slowly, and sales after a few years of rapid growth have flattened out. And Apple is bound to lose market share, if only because its current share, more than 60%, is so large. Quote,
yeah. That's true. If they're going for the education market, probably wasn't moving as fast as it was back then. For if they already had a working machine, I wonder if back then they really felt the need to really purchase a new machine just because it's 16 bits now instead of 8 bits.
yeah, and like there was certainly an element of schools where like you'd want better graphics and sound. Like there were so many like educational games, like Oregon Trail, I believe, was initially an Apple II game.
Yeah.
All right, so now it's time to talk about the hardware of this computer. The CPU was a 16-bit WDC 65C816, which was running at 2.8 megahertz. And there is also a 1 megahertz mode for running legacy Apple II software because a lot of that software didn't work correctly on faster machines, so it needed to slow down for those. And of course, like Apple said earlier, that only about 90% of existing software was working for this, so it wasn't perfect compatibility. One of the things that gets brought up with this computer a lot is that Apple intentionally limited the Apple IIGS's CPU speed so that it wouldn't cannibalize sales from the Macintosh. And
Interesting.
I couldn't find a good source for that. I couldn't find anything good like proving or disproving that, I'll say. So like maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I'm not entirely sure. I found one summary that mentioned Apple CPU supplier would only certify the CPU at 4 megahertz, and then I guess Apple chose an even lower 2.8 megahertz speed. I'm not quite sure what the difference there is.
Mhm.
Maybe there were like manufacturing yield issues for the CPU because on paper this is capable of up to 14 megahertz. But
Oh
I don't
wow.
know. I
Yeah.
don't know if that was like an option at this point in time. Like maybe that was only once they got their factories going for this.
That's interesting. If it was to kind of limit, sales and not to lower sales of the Macintosh, it does sound like a very Apple thing to do.
Yeah, and like based on how
Mm.
the everything was going earlier, that seems plausible. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if that's true or not. All right, so the base configuration of the Apple IIGS had 128 kilobytes of RAM, which was upgradable to 8 megabytes. And it supported all Apple II graphics modes, as well as a new 320 by 200 and 640 by 200 graphics modes, with up to 4,096 colors. The sound chip was an S-Connect 32 with 16 stereo voices. One of the voices was reserved for system beeps. There were 7 expansion slots, RGB output, an Apple desktop bus port, which was the same one used on Mac computers of the time. And it would actually, this is actually the port that would continue to be used until Apple adopted USB in like the original iMac. And it also had composite video, it had a joystick port, it had audio output, and a few other expansion options. Again, this was a very like expandable computer. Like this was like a PC. So you
Yeah.
could slot in more cards, you could do a lot of crazy stuff. However, as that article earlier mentioned, there was no monitor, no hard drive, and no floppy drive included with this computer. So unless you already had an Apple II and you were like upgrading, you'd have to pay a lot more than that for a usable computer. And the storage situation was further complicated by the fact that older Apple II computers used 5.25-inch floppy disks, while the Apple IIGS was built for higher capacity 3.5-inch floppy disks. So if you wanted to use most of the software made for the Apple II, as well as like games and software made for the 2GS, you probably needed one of each. So that's getting more expensive. I found one ad that said that in October of 1985, the 5.25-inch drive was priced at $299, which was about $845 in 2023. And then at that same point in time, the 3.5-inch drive was $399, which was over $1,000 in 2023. So because of the weird position this computer's in, like it gets very expensive if you want to like go all out. Now, one of the cool budget options with this computer is that Apple did sell an upgrade kit where you could turn an Apple IIe into an Apple IIGS. So it was like swapping out the like motherboard, and they even gave you like a little like replacement sticker for the outside, so your
Oh,
computer
that's
could
cool.
say 2GS instead of 2E.
That's really interesting that they would offer that.
Yeah.
Definitely not something we would ever see today.
Now, here,
Yeah.
here, swap the motherboard to get the new iPhone 15. The Apple IIGS shipped with ProDOS 16, which was an upgraded version of the disk operating system used on older Apple II machines, which was renamed to ProDOS 8. When Apple released this computer, there was a very simple program launcher. So it could like list all of your programs you had open on any available drives. So like at least you didn't need to type in commands to find your programs, but it wasn't like a desktop that we're familiar with.
Okay.
It was just like a launcher.
And so ProDOS, I'm not too versed in my operating systems before probably like 2000. ProDOS was developed by Apple.
Yeah, but it used Microsoft Basic. So like you could write your own basic programs in it, or you could use other ones. It's very limited. So kind of just
Okay.
like a lot like MS DOS. Like there wasn't a lot in the operating system itself. Like
Mm.
not really any drivers, not really like APIs for applications. Like when you were writing software for the Apple II and the 2GS at this time, you were still doing like a lot of the work yourself. Now, in May of 1987, Apple released System Software 2.0, which included a desktop environment called the Apple II Desktop, which was not actually made by Apple. It was based on a third-party program called MouseDeck, and it was also pretty buggy, so that wasn't a great option. Now, later that year, in September of 1987, Apple released System Software 3.1, which replaced that basic launcher and the Apple II desktop with this new thing called the Apple IIGS Finder. And this looked a lot more like the Macintosh's Finder desktop, except that it was in color. This was only a few months after the release of the first color Mac, the Macintosh 2. So this is still pretty impressive. By 1988, 2 years after the Apple IIGS was introduced, there still wasn't a lot of native software available. Some companies were postponing or canceling plans to develop 2GS software, choosing instead to continue investing in the regular Apple II or just work on the Macintosh platform. And part of that was like, this was like, weird, expensive upgrade computer. And part of it was the problem that a lot of other computers from this era had, like the Commodore 128, where it had a compatibility mode for a lower power system. So a lot of companies look at this and like, okay, we can make one thing for the Apple II and one thing for the 2GS, or we can just make one for the Apple II and it'll run on the 2GS. It just won't be quite as good. And we can save a lot of time and money.
Yeah, makes the most sense, I think.
Yeah. Or again, they worked on the Macintosh because it was pretty clear like that was eventually going to be the main thing. It just wasn't quite there yet. One of the most interesting examples of this was Apple IIGS, which was the most popular Apple II program at this time, which was it was like a productivity suite. So it had a word processor, it had a spreadsheet, and it had a file manager. And that was like the Apple II program. Like you bought an Apple II, that's like one of the first things you probably end up buying. There wasn't a 2GS version of that until late 1988. So like a lot of people were buying this computer that have like, oh great, upgraded graphics and sound, and they're just running the same exact software they were running before because there just wasn't a lot available. And when the optimized version did arrive, which was called Apple IIGS GS, it did have like this Mac-like interface, and it was very great piece of software. But it was priced at $249, and it required 1 megabyte of RAM, which was more than that base configuration. So hopefully you already upgraded your Apple II.
What are they doing with that? Yeah.
I don't know how long Apple sold the 2GS with that little amount of RAM, but yeah, this computer got pretty pricey if you really wanted to use it.
Yeah, you get the computer and you already have to upgrade it to start using the software that came 2 years later. Is the best software for the system. Wow, yeah, it's pretty crazy.
In September of 1988, Apple introduced an overhauled operating system for the Apple IIGS called GSOS. And this was much closer to a real operating system than like ProDOS. It had built-in functions for handling keyboard input, displaying text and graphics, rendering the mouse, connecting to printers and modems, and more. Like it had a driver model, so companies making products for this could just make drivers that plugged into this. The desktop environment seen by the user was still the same system software with the Finder that Apple already had, but there's more utilities and some other new features. One of the really cool parts about GSOS is that it had a very simple driver system. So literally all you had to do if you bought like, I don't know, like a MIDI keyboard for your Apple IIGS or like a weird storage hard drive, all you had to do was copy the driver file into a driver's folder and it would just be recognized immediately.
Oh wow, that is very cool.
Apple also developed a feature called File System Translator, which allowed more types of disks and file formats to work with the Apple IIGS. So initially, GSOS included drivers for ProDOS disks and CD-ROMs. So now we've got a video to watch. We've got a demo from the Computer Chronicles.
Starting from 15 minutes and 24 seconds?
Yes. Yeah. All right, so go on 3, 2, 1, go.
With us in the studio now is Ann Bachtold, product manager for the Apple IIGS, and next to Ann is Stu Roberson, director for marketing with Activision.
Yeah, and over the years we've seen various versions of the Apple II. We just saw the C Plus and so forth. How do you differentiate the GS from the rest of the Apple line?
The GS is the top of the line for the Apple II product family, and it sells into both consumer as well as education markets, but it's really the most powerful platform we have.
But it is still an Apple II
Oh, it's
compatible.
definitely an Apple II, and it runs all the Apple II software that's available.
Can you show us what it looks like, what you're working with?
Sure.
The key thing, Ann, is really the operating system here.
Yes,
It's not a new
definitely.
machine, it's a new
No.
operating system
The
for
GS
the
has been out
machine.
for almost 2 years, and what I'm booting up right now is the new Apple IIGS system software, version 4.0, which we recently introduced about a month ago at Apple Fest.
Well, while it's booting up, have you identified the customer base now? Obviously you have over the past 2 years. Who buys the GS?
People who are interested in doing home productivity, families, and we have a very large education base in both K through 12 areas as well as some college base, but it's primarily a K through 12 machine and home productivity machine for families.
Okay.
So what we're booting into right now is basically the heart of the new system software, which is GSOS, the new operating system. And some of the improvements that GSOS brings to the GS are, first of all, increased disk access, which, as you can see, definitely speeds the boot time of the system over our previous system software. And we've also introduced the concept of file system translation. And essentially what file system translation allows us to do is access data files from other operating systems. And what we've done is we've created new tools called FSTs, or file system translators, which allow us to do that. And one of the things I'd like to demonstrate today is the file system translator for the High Sierra file system. And as you can see, we've got a system right here that's configured with CD-ROM. And one of the things that we can do is, through using the High Sierra FST, we can actually access applications, CD-ROM applications such as Bookshelf, which is from Microsoft.
And bring it right into Multiscribe.
And bring it right into Multiscribe. Multiscribe is a very popular GS word processing program. A lot of our users have it. So what I am right now, I'm in a Multiscribe file, and what I'm going to do is go into my disk area, and I'll go ahead and scan through some of my different volumes here until I bring up Bookshelf. And I'll go ahead and open a Bookshelf file. Let's just say I want to access Bartlett's quotations, for instance. And I've actually imported a data file from Bookshelf into my Multiscribe package. And this really opens up the world of CD-ROM for our users, and especially our education customers are very interested in being able to access all the data that you can find on CD-ROM applications.
What other kind of applications do you really see in the CD-ROM area?
Well, CD-ROM is really a new industry for us, and it's really exploding, and we're supporting it now with the CD-ROM drive that we introduced in March. And this is the first time we've actually supported it on the Apple II line. So any large storage application, this one is a good example.
I guess encyclopedia.
Exactly, exactly.
Quickly, Ann, could you run us back to the operating system and show us some of the new tools that are in the OS?
So yeah, that's the 2GS. It looks a lot like early Mac, the software they're showing off.
Yeah, that's what I noticed as well. It's pretty cool. I think the FST stuff was awesome, especially for that time. It's something I feel like they should kind of bring back these days, all the different file systems that we have. If you're on Mac and you plug in, or I guess it's the other way around. If you're trying to, I don't know, I've got USBs that I got to reformat here and there to use on the different operating systems. I feel like kind of stepped backwards from that, and they made it seem like it was pretty easy, to bring in files from other operating systems, which I thought was awesome.
Yeah. So later in that clip, which is also linked in the show notes if you want to watch this yourself, later in that demo is a paint program from Activision, and it shows off some of the graphics capability of this computer, like what this computer can actually do. And this was really impressive to me. So go on 3, 2, 1, go.
How important is the 2GS as a product line to software developers like Activision?
Well, Activision is really dedicated to the Apple IIGS and to that education and home marketplace that Ann had mentioned. To the large growing developer base, I think you're seeing a lot more activity in the GS, as some of the original Apple II developers have now started shifting their emphasis over to the new machine.
Do you have any idea what the size of that market is now?
Right now there's over 300,000 2GSs installed, and that's growing. We anticipate, as what happened last year, that during the Christmas quarter, they'll sell more Apple IIGSs than any other Apple CPU.
Stu, you've got a paint program from Activision, which takes advantage of the graphics of the GS. Describe it and show it to us.
Yeah, this is PaintWorks Gold, and PaintWorks Gold is one of 8 products that we make for the Apple IIGS. PaintWorks Gold was derived from PaintWorks Plus, which is a 512K version of the product for ease of use and has made its way into many schools. What we're going to take a look at here are some of the advanced features that you can do with the 2GS using PaintWorks Gold. Now, the image it's going to load is one that you may have seen. It's the Taj Mahal. And we're going to use two features, slippy colors, which is a unique feature, and then masking colors to make the Taj Mahal actually reflected in the pool below. What slippy colors actually allows you to do is define colors for your lasso tool to slip around. So we're going to define all the colors that are used in the sky. Then we're going to choose our lasso tool and select the Taj Mahal. You'll note once I have released this that just the Taj Mahal is selected. This allows you to pick out objects that you want from any painting. Now we're going to go ahead and flip this Taj Mahal around to paste it down below. So we'll just flip it vertically. And now we have our Taj. Now I'm going to move the screen around a bit. So first we'll cut this out, grab our handle. Now let's paste in the Taj Mahal. As we move it up, now we have a perfect reflection. Well, near perfect, because you can see it's overlapping the grass. Well, that's where masking colors comes in. We can actually mask these colors so that you can paint behind them or around them.
Show us how you do that.
We'll go ahead and mask some colors here. And I'm going to mask every single color and then unmask the colors that may be in the water. Now you'll note as it has made its selection that instantly the Taj goes behind. In fact, you can actually paint behind the other objects that you see here on the screen.
So that was cool.
Yeah, pretty cool software. It's funny hearing Activision as like computer software. You know?
Yeah, when's Call of Duty coming to the 2GS?
Yeah, I was pretty impressed when they started bringing the reflection behind the image. That was pretty cool.
So after this point, Apple keeps working on the software. In May of 1989, Apple released System Software 5 for the 2GS, which included several performance improvements, including a new feature called Express Load, which made certain programs load up to 8 times faster. According to Apple2History.org, AppleWorks GS went from taking 4 minutes to load to as little as 1 minute with the new system update. Goes back to the era we're in where it takes 4 minutes to load the Word application, basically.
Yeah. I mean, 1 minute to boot, that's,
Those read and write times were not good.
Yeah.
So then Apple released System Software 6.0 in March of 1992, which was ultimately the last major update for the 2GS. It added full read and write support for Macintosh HFS disks, so you could read and write files saved from a Mac, as well as read-only access for older Apple II disks and Apple Pascal disks. The Finder was redesigned almost from scratch, with a new Windows menu for switching between all of the windows you had open, and better support for going through subfolders. There were also a lot of new and updated drivers. There were some changes to the control panel, which was like the settings, and some other stuff. But around this time, the Apple IIGS and the Apple II series as a whole was on the decline, definitely. Part of this was on Apple because they reportedly told software developers to not create new programs for the 2 series because it was going to be discontinued soon.
Oh, yeah.
So
that doesn't really help their case there.
That would do it.
Yeah.
And then, as early as 1988, Apple executives were saying that no more models would be produced in the Apple II series, which was 2 years after the 2GS was introduced. So, ideally, when you want to be ramping up your new platform, someone from Apple's like, no, this is the last one.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't really instill confidence in anyone who wants to afford it.
No. And there were rumors of a new Apple IIGS model with a higher resolution screen and faster CPU, but that never became real. There were eventually third-party accelerator cards that did boost the performance of this computer, but not a lot of stuff was really built for those, because then if I'm making a game, then my market is like a subcategory of a subcategory of a subcategory. So my game's going to be for 8 people in total.
Yeah, literally at that point. I wonder, man, I guess overclocking was because we mentioned before that the CPU was capable of being a lot faster. Do you know if anything was really available at the time for overclocking, or was it more of just hobbyists trying to, do something like that, or if that was even possible.
You might have been able to replace the chip with like one of the newer manufactured ones, but yeah, I'm not sure where the limit was. I know definitely like accelerator cards kind of just boosted general system performance, and then you could upgrade the RAM to I think it was 8 MB, so you could do a lot more at that point. And there was still like people at Apple who cared about this computer, and they were still working on it. Like the fact that it got huge system upgrades like every year was on the market was kind of cool. But support from third-party developers was still an issue, and there was a lot of competition from 16-bit and 32-bit computers, not to mention the Mac again. There was also the issue where schools were still heavily invested in the Apple II platform, so like ideally this would be the market that you would sell an Apple IIGS to, but a lot of them never made that jump because again they're schools and they already bought all the computers and they still work. So
right, yeah.
And eventually Apple had an upgrade option for those. They started selling the Macintosh LC, which was like a more compact desktop Mac, and they produced an Apple IIe card for that. So it was like you buy this Mac and you get this card, which is like an Apple IIe on a single card. And
oh wow,
with that upgrade, you have a Mac that can run Mac software and Apple II software. So
now that's really cool.
That's kind of like the upgrade path. And that's also how you sell the schools on buying a Mac. It's like, hey, you can still use all the software you bought.
Yeah, that's a much better way of, getting them to upgrade than to just release this computer and a few years later just be like, yeah, we're going to discontinue this.
Yeah. So finally, in late 1992, Apple announced that it was ending production of the IIGS. Apple said it had considered building an Apple IIGS card for the Macintosh LC, which would give owners of this computer a migration path, because that card that Apple made didn't work with 2GS software. So if you had invested into the 2GS system, you're like, well, I guess I'm done now.
Yeah.
Gotta toss all this
I
out.
see.
And like Apple said they were considering that, but it would have cost as much as the entire Mac, this one card. So that's kind of why they didn't do it. 2GS just, discontinued, and the Apple IIe, which was the just normal Apple II, but it was like the upgradable version, that remained available for another year, but it was discontinued 1 year after the 2GS in late 1993, which was the official end of the Apple II series. So after that point, Apple was only selling Macs. The 2GS still had like a life after that point. New software and games continued to trickle out for the 2GS after it's discontinued. One of the more notable games for this is a port of Wolfenstein 3D, which was originally planned to be released in 1995 as a commercial release. Like, this is a game you go out and buy, but it had some like development issues, so it got passed to another developer and then to another developer, and at a certain point it was so old that its software open sourced the game. So then they like couldn't really sell it as a commercial product anymore. The developer who was working on it, I guess, it turned into just like a hobby. And it was eventually developed. The developer's name is Ninja Force, and it was released in 1998. It was a very good port, though. So yeah, if you still had an Apple IIGS, you were rocking.
Bringing out of the closet after 6 years of discontinuation.
Like, finally, the game's out. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like breaking out your Wii to play Just Dance 2021. Yeah, and especially funny, 98. That's the same year Half-Life came out.
Yeah.
PC.
Oh man. So yeah, people are already moving on to like 3D games, and you're waiting for Wolfenstein on the 2GS. That's why.
Yeah. It was a great port though, so that's cool. And like that developer still kept making 2GS software. They made a Bomberman clone called Kaboom, which was released in 2015. A little bit more recently, another developer created a Centipede-like game for the 2GS called Bugs, with the GS capitalized, which I think is funny. And that was released in 2021. There's still like a little bit of a homebrew community around this computer. I don't know if
That's
homebrew
really
is the
cool.
right word, but
Yeah, like I would say like a niche community. Yeah, that's really cool.
yeah, that's the Apple IIGS, and I this computer is really interesting because there's a whole alternate history theorizing that people do with this computer, which is like, what if Apple gave this computer a chance, right? Because like
Yeah.
almost immediately they were sabotaging this. Like I don't know if the slowdown thing was real, but like Apple executives saying like while they were selling this computer, like don't make software for this. Like
Yeah, that's really weird. Yeah, it would have been interesting to kind of see where it would have gone if they actually put in effort, told people to make software for it, not just abandon it. Because yeah, it's a weird case. It's got an expensive computer. It's on a different platform than the previous one and their other model, the Macintosh. So they're already balancing what 3 platforms there, and they want to push this, and then showing the opposite that they don't really want to support it. So it's very interesting. Yeah, I wonder what it would have turned into if they had a different mindset.
do you have any plugs? Anything you'd like to share?
Oh, I guess my plug is just really my website. I have a little personal portfolio website, lucasbastos.com. You kind of check out stuff I've worked on, some side projects, previous projects. I got my GitHub on there, LinkedIn if anyone wants to connect. But kind of what I'm working on. I haven't worked on it for like last month or so, so I really need some motivation to continue. I am trying to write a um, NES emulator in Rust. So I've got
Mm,
I've got most of the CPU commands down, but it's kind of cool trying to emulate
that's
the
cool.
6502. Yeah, I don't know. Once I get the graphics part, I might struggle a little bit, but yeah, kind of working on the CPU part right now. So it's been pretty cool to kind of learn. First time learning Rust too, so learning a new language and trying to write an emulator for the first time.
Everyone go check that out and go email Lucas with motivation.
Yes.
Send your best motivational memes.
Oh, yes. Memes would be appreciated.
TechTales is on Twitter at TechTales Show and on Mastodon at TechTales at mas.to. The links for those are in the show notes, along with all of the sources and the video we watched, and links to support the show if you want to do that. And thank you for listening, and we'll be back in your podcast feed soon.
See ya.
Apple II forever. Make it